begin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us for our Communications Planning webinar for the King Day of Service. We're so glad that you could join us. Our goal today is to give you some ideas and tips and tools that will help you maximize the exposure of your day of service and increase your own organizational sustainability through your outreach. So with that, I want to introduce to you our speakers for today from the Corporation for National and Community Service and from Campaign Consultation. From Campaign Consultation, Jasmine Touton, who is a project specialist, will be going over some housekeeping at the very beginning, and then we'll be joined by Ted Miller, who is our Director of Public Affairs and Deputy Chief of External Affairs, and Samantha Warfield, who is our Acting Press Secretary. Thank you again. We look forward to reading about all your successful King Day of Service projects or seeing your news clips. So, Jasmine, all yours.
Thanks, Rhonda. Before we start today's webinar, I just want to review with you all some housekeeping. There will be question and answer during this presentation, and it will happen at the end of the presentation, so be thinking about your questions throughout. When you have a question at the end of the presentation, you can press *1 on your telephone keypad, and you will be placed in a Q&A queue. At any point during today's webinar, you can include comments in the chat feature that you see to the right of your screen, and just below that, you can include any questions that you have in the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to answer them. At the end of today's presentation, the PowerPoint will be emailed and posted online for all participants, and there will be links in that PowerPoint, so if you're missing a link, you should be able to access it at that time. And if you have any questions after the webinar, please contact MLK Day at campaignconsultation.com, and we will do our best to answer them. Now I'd like to introduce Ted Miller from the Corporation for National and Community Service to begin today's webinar. Ted?
All right. Hey, Jasmine. Hey, everyone. This is Ted Miller with the Corporation for National and Community Service. I'm here with my colleague, Sam Warfield. We're going to go through the slides that are part of today's presentation very quickly, and then we'd like to really, when the time comes, field as many questions from all of you as possible. So I want to, first of all, thank everyone for taking the time today. I know that it seems like January 21st, 2013 is eons away from now, but those of you, I was saying that about Thanksgiving in September. So I think that we're moving very quickly along the calendar, and I know that, as you can imagine here, where we've had, as an agency, been focusing on some of the national service deployments into states affected by Hurricane Sandy, we also know that we have to balance another one of our priorities, and that's definitely MLK Day and the Day of Service that the agency oversees. So I know today we're going to really focus on 4 key areas. We have in that slide media attention, coordination. We have some resources and the MLK Day public service announcements, and Sam is really going to focus on social media in her presentation. So I'd like to just start, let's go to the next slide into why media is important. And it's really, it seems somewhat self-explanatory, but I think that media is about more than just getting news coverage. It's more about being in the newspaper, getting blog coverage, or being on television. Media coverage of your event or of your initiative, really, I think that gives credibility. It's really third-party validation. And think about it, you know, we have if you think about it in terms of TV newscasts across the country, you can kind of see that, you know, they have 20 minutes to tell a 20 or 22 minutes to tell a community story, and if your event, your service event, makes it into a local news coverage, that means that people who are viewing at home, the potentially thousands to, in some media markets, millions of people, are basically told that this was worthwhile and a testament to the importance of this project to the community. So credibility is number one. Another part is just recruitment and partnerships. You know, I know that in a time of where we have multiple resource challenges, that getting media attention is a good way to recruit more volunteers into your program if that's one of your goals, and also to find new partners. I think that there's just a willingness out there for people to collaborate and leverage what's working by joining together in partnerships. And I also, just on partnerships, I would also say that part of getting press is to share that information with your partners who are part of the process. The good thing is that, we say here that when we get good media coverage for something, that's when our jobs really begin, because in this world of a very complex media landscape, you have to make sure that the audiences you want to reach, whether they be your local elected officials, whether they be people who are helping providing you with grant money, or potentially could be providing you with grant money, or people who are working in similar fields or going to be helpful to you, that they get from you examples of the coverage that you're getting. And then resources. Number one is that, that's just the more you're in the news, the more likely you're able to attract more people, and then that leads to greater resources. You're able to leverage that news coverage. And resources could be in a number of fronts. Obviously, there's the financial end and the contributions that could increase if you're an organization that relies on on contributions from individuals or organizations, but also in terms of what you're able to do with it. As you get a larger profile, and Sam will talk about this later, if you're recruiting more people into the fold, that means that your Facebook followership should be growing, your Twitter following should be growing, the list, and we'll get to a couple of these things later on, but the list of people who are in the media who know about you will continue to grow. So all of those things are resources, and as you get more media coverage, that's an area where you can measure your growth. So let's go to the next slide and just talk really quickly about steps for gaining media attention. I was trying to come up with a fancy or fun acronym for this one, or some kind of abbreviation. We just didn't make it. So PLRRSS means nothing, so if you take the first letter of each of the words. But I'll just go through this really quickly in terms of plan. Media plans can be very succinct. That's what it is when you think about it. And really, the plan should consist of two things. If you're breaking down a plan into, what are the two sentences of what your main message is? Who are your target audiences? Where do you want to see this story told? And I think we'll talk a little bit about that later. But in this landscape, is this a story that makes the most sense for a news program? Is it best for a blog or some other media channel? So you can kind of think about those things. That's where the planning comes into place. Lists are on a number of fronts, and I just want to say, just like in the world, the list is more than just a medium. There are a lot of lists that you should be making in terms of trying to create media attention. So let's just break it down into some specifics. Let's say you have, what do we do? Okay, so you have a local reporter who works for a television station who through your research, you looked at what they did for MLK Day last year, you checked on the reporter, and you find out that he or she still works for that station. So you get his or her contact information. You should also say, does this person have a presence on Twitter? Does he or she have a Facebook page? Does the station have a Facebook page at all? You should be plotting out all of those lists across there, so it's comprehensive. So you're saying, on many ways, like for example, we'll talk a little bit about this later in tactical stuff, but that will give you a list of assets that you can use on your own. And I think that also includes area bloggers or whatever else. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you should, there are some stories that, a lot of the traditional mainstream media pick up stories now from local sort of citizen journalists and bloggers who are out covering stories because they're closer to the community, and a lot of that bubbles up, and you're able to get coverage in sort of the traditional press that has at this point a larger audience. Resources. Resources and register. Okay, resources, that's a little bit about what I talked about earlier, is that you have to devote some resources, time and resources, in order to get media attention. That means, you should really, in the time between now and MLK Day, decide how much. I know that a lot of you are wearing several hats in your organization. You're not just doing communications, you're doing, fundraising, you're doing volunteer management. So really carve out enough part of your time to give the most part to your media plan. If it's, 15 minutes a day, 2 hours a week, whatever it is, plot out the things, the key tasks that you need to make, and then plan accordingly, according to your schedule. Register there is the tools that I think you can find if you have any questions registering on our site so that we have your event on that site. The reason why that's important is that as the convener of the MLK National Day of Service, we want to be able to show national media, regional media, any kind of or audience we reach of just the breadth of the work that you're doing. And so having all of that in one place makes it much easier for us to tell that story, and I think at the end of the day allows us to know what's going on, and we can direct, if we do get inquiries, we can direct press your way. The story hook. Well, luckily for this, we work on a lot of things where we have to, come up with a story hook on our own. And for this, what's good about MLK Day and the Day of Service is that it's a federal holiday, clearly, and that the story hook is ready-made in a sense that you're going to be doing it's a day of service, so you're going to be doing a service project with you and your sub-grantees. But I know that there's a different way to look at that on a number of fronts. One is that it's the first time that there's a project that's unfolding in your community. If this is the first time something's happening that your project is doing, or the first time that you're a recipient of a grant, that's new. That's a hook because it's a new story that hasn't been told about MLK. If you are an existing program that's done this for a number of years, and we know that you're just doing the advisory and getting the people together, or doing, having a press event, you may have seen media coverage wane in the last couple of years. Think about it in a different way and say, is there a person within our one-person story we could really find who has benefited from this program? And if you look at all of the metro pages of all of our newspapers across the country, then they're still a good source for attention, that you try to collect that person's story and maybe go to a columnist who's going to be writing about, who covers community events and community affairs, and give that columnist that personal story, so it's a little bit of a different dimension, and that still does your overall plans of getting attention for your organization and what it does in the community, and then puts a personal face to that story about why it's important. And then, secondly, you have to see the last bullet point there. We want to see your success stories. As I said earlier, part of listing or part of registering on our site also gives us the opportunity to tell the full story. We want to be able to share with a number of audiences what is going on, what kind of stories are gaining attention and traction in media markets across the country. There's also something else that you should know that we do, that we share these stories with a number of folks, not only at the national level, but also federal policymakers and lawmakers, people, a wide range of agencies and partners that we work with. So by sharing that success with us, you get into that kind of attention. So I think that's just something to consider as you're putting your plan together. You do the day of, if you were doing a media event, the day of around the service project. Okay, you do that, you have to execute all of these things to pull that off, but what does the next day look like? And if you've gotten some coverage, to whom do you send snippets of that coverage so that it gets additional play in other channels? So let's look quickly at the next, it's the communications plan for November and December. I'm not going to read these to you. I think they're fairly self-explanatory, these bullet points, but I think it's a good one to sort of, I think you all are getting copies of this presentation. Pull this out and sort of attach dates to it that make sense of your own. I think it has these 5 steps are a good starting place for everyone. So let's go to the next one and talk about early January. And so these are get down to specifics on what you should be doing. And again, I think because we all know what the date is of the actual day of service, but we want to make sure that that you have a checklist. So looking at this, the one that reads early January, build 2 weeks into the promotion process, not only to develop the materials, and you'll be getting templates from us, and hopefully by the early part of December, late part of November. So we'll provide you some of those templates, and those include media advisories, press releases, some suggested talking points that you can share with people who are going to be speaking at your events. So what I would do in looking at this one is really attach some dates, look at your calendar and see by when you can make these kinds of tasks. And also you look at the last bullet point, that's like pitch local bloggers. Well, we know that various organizations are at different stages of their media plan. So if you look at that bullet and say, well, I don't know who the local bloggers are, that's all right. You have plenty of time now to carve out some moments to sort of look out and see, where you might. I would start with blogs that actually with some of your larger papers in your media markets. So in our case, it would be the Washington Post, but then other cities, because they do now almost have people who who are providing content or writing stories specifically for not for the print edition, but for online, and a lot of those are following specific community events. So, and what you'll see there is that they often post to other blogs that would include more neighborhood-oriented information or local information. So that's when you say pitch local bloggers, you might have to do some research before that. The next slide, let's go to that one on the day of communications plan, or just right before. So again, this is kind of your checklist for that day. On the second bullet, the first bullet point, on-site media contacts, what you want to do is make sure that people who are involved in this program understand a couple of things. One is that, in order to pull your message off, you have to have a designated spokesperson. You have to anyone who's participating in an event should get a very succinct one-page memo the day before about when to show up at one time, what role he or she is playing in the overall, if it's for lack of a better description, a press conference, when do they arrive and what contact do they have. And also you should, if you are having multiple speakers at an event, you should arrange to have a call at least 1 or 2 days in advance to go through the format, to talk to people about what the overall message is and what role that they play in it. And that does a couple of things. One is that you don't have any confusion on the day of as people are arriving, and allows you to focus a little bit more on making sure the media are in the right place. And then secondly, you also have a very good sense of if you have any kind of duplication that you can avoid. There's nothing worse than sitting through a press conference where 4 speakers all say the same thing. We've all been there, and you want to avoid that. You want to have every speaker have a minute to 2 minutes at most to say something, and then it can all be accomplished in a very short period of time. Press kits, it depends on how fancy you want to get. I'm a believer in sort of the less is more. You want to have a couple of things in what the media are going to need is, a summary of what you're doing today, a summary of who's benefiting, a summary of your organization, and then if you're having people speak, the list of speakers and short biographies for each of them. That way they know it all, and that's all that you really need in that term. They're not going to be able to read long fact sheets and others. Now, some might ask for that information, so have it on hand, but be sure these folks have to turn around material in a very fast period of time, so you want to really edit through those materials and give them the who, what, when, and where very quickly, and why very, very succinctly. You can see the other things that I'll run through: the project description, contact information. All those things should be part of what you're sending out regarding your MLK event. So on this one, I'm going to go to creating media lists. It's the next slide. So I know that we have a diverse array of folks some of whom you might have in-house communications teams, and others of you may be, that this may be part of your job description, but not your whole job description. So we hope this is a good starting place for creating your media list. And depending on where you are and what you want to achieve with your communications plan, for example, if you're in a medium-sized market, like I'm a native of Kansas City, so that's a market where you have, major, all 4 major networks there's a large, daily newspaper, there's still some radio, and there's a growing presence of sort of online sort of citizen journalism and blogs. You kind of do, what I would do is cut down create those lists according to those categories and just go through television, newspaper, blogs, radio, whatever channel through which you think that you can reach an audience. You want to go through there and first start where you are. You might have an old press list that may require updating, or you may be starting one from scratch, and I think it's good to sort of build those categories up front. Looking at where you see here under the bullet point that reads better yet, people who only cover civic engagement and nonprofits. If you have someone in your local TV market, for example, who does Hero of the Week on some channel, that's the person you want to talk to about MLK Day, because it's likely if you have someone in your program who's benefiting, who's a leader on civic engagement and volunteerism, you want to get that person in front of them. And then you have the hook right there is that you've written the story for the person who's doing that beat. You've given him or her the information or the person that he or she needs, and you've given that sort of that feel-good story of making a difference in their community. So those are the kinds of things that you don't have to recreate the wheel on that front. And then looking at the tools for generating media lists, that's a service that we can help you provide here. We provided some bullet points here with Cision, a Bulldog Reporter, and Technorati, but don't just rely on that. If you do have some questions, go through our contact here, and we can. I'm sure if you have questions, others will as well. So we could probably get a running list of commonly asked questions as we prepare for MLK Day, and we can help resolve those for everyone. Just one. Before I think we go over to, okay, so looking over here at the next slide over here at the resources for MLK Day, we'll be sending out new templates. Obviously, they're designed for 2013, but you'll see here some of the resources that will be coming your way. And let's go to the next slide over here, register your project. This is just a how-to. Again, I said earlier, what this is really twofold. It allows not only for you to get, and onto a list of other similar projects or that are part of MLK Day in one place. It allows us to show the breadth of the civic involvement that's going on across the country in the day of service. Then the next slide we have here is crafting a newsworthy pitch. I talked a little bit about this earlier, and I think that these next couple of slides are important, but look at this first one where it has a formula for a successful pitch. This is, the localizing obviously is better. It's very hard for people and reporters and media are looking for ways like MLK, it's the MLK federal holiday and the weekend of what story can we tell locally? And you have the timeliness and the local angle. I would look here, depending on where your program is, you can see clearly that depending on what you're doing is like looking for the human interest, and that means the personal story that we talked about overall. If you're a project and you're a community project that's been doing a lot of things for a lot of years, that's fantastic, but maybe find one person who best speaks to the experience, someone who's benefited for the program, who, if you're thinking about news stories, that people can relate to and root for as they go through this story, especially if you're a program where you're helping people who have maybe experienced economic problems or other obstacles, but your program helps them overcome those obstacles. That's a good story because it has a beginning, middle, and a looking forward. Not necessarily the end, but it's it has the elements of a very good story, human interest story. So let's go ahead and we'll skip crafting a newsworthy pitch because I think I covered a lot of that. The pitching a story, these tips are all very good. It goes back to pitching a story is the last thing that you do as far as before you have done a couple of things like reviewed we all consume media. We know you should have an idea of where you want to see your story play out. Start there, find out people who are reporters or writers who are covering issues or covering areas that are close to what you're doing. Find them, develop that list, and then once you do the list development, you have a target list of reporters or other media, then you start the pitching and letting them know that this event is happening. The things that are coming, it has down here under Tie Your Story to a Recent News Event, you see to check the AP Planner on Twitter for timely ideas. Why that's important is that you will get a sense of what else is going on in your media market. We know that there could be multiple events, we don't know, but you just should have a sense, and that's something you should be checking even now as you're trying to plan the timing for your event. If there's something, typically for press conferences, the traditional sort of old school press conferences, we used to follow the rule of any time between 10 and 1. The reason is because most local television stations have their assignment meetings where they really decide what they're going to cover earlier in the morning. And I would actually recommend 10:30 being the earliest because sometimes those meetings don't take place until 9 or 9:30. You should have talked to at least the assignment editor and some other people at that station or one of the reporters before that, but knowing full well that you want to give them time to attend a daily meeting that's important for the reporter because they find out what their expectation is going to be for the day. So, and then the 1 o'clock rule is because, and it's again, we know that media is 24/7, but just looking at television in particular, they've got to get back to the station, edit that story, and turn it around for locally, newscasts start at 5, 6, you get some go 5 and 6, and then they go later on at the 10 or 11, depending on what media market or time zone you're in. So those are things to take into consideration when you're putting this together. If you do have some materials from previous events, that would be great. You see here that if you happen to have, a celebrity or a political figure who's involved, those are great folks to help be validators. Just looking at that too, if you have someone who's coming into town to do something for you, or who can do an interview with, mostly these are print reporters mostly, you can do an interview in advance of your event, that would be fantastic. You see here we have the blog or website. Make sure that all of the information that's on your website about your event is up to date. Make sure it's useful. I know that updating websites, especially if you're a 1 or 2 or 3 person operation, can be incredibly difficult, but when you're at a point now that MLK, which if you should know is one of the biggest media events we do at the corporation, so you're going to get a lot of attention, is like to take that extra time to make sure all of your channels, Facebook page, Twitter, whatever else, there's nothing worse than putting out an advisory to tons of reporters, hundreds, and your Twitter feed or your Facebook page or your website don't include that information. It doesn't make you look very coordinated, and it also frustrates the reporters who are out. You might get them one time, they're searching out for something. If they don't find it on one of your channels instantly in a way that's useful to them, they're going to go somewhere else. So yeah, be persistent, that last bullet point. Don't give up. Be persistent. You're doing good things. So looking up here, like tapping into local media, I think we've talked a little bit about all of these types of channels. I would just take a look at that and sort of do what we used to call the media mapping that we've talked about before. Look at all the channels through which you consume news, and then match that up with people who are in those channels who might be interested in your project, and then base the timeline of when you need to reach out to them. Looking here, this is looking at local media impact. This is just a chart that was put in here, and you can kind of see. I think the key point to take away from this chart is that it shows sort of the diversification of our media landscape over the last few years. And why I want to tell that too is, like, there are media channels that are earned. That's like the TV and radio and print editions, and then there are media channels that you own, that being your Facebook and Twitter feed. And if you look at that 55% underneath the 74%, increasingly people are getting their media. There is not so much of the. More and more people are getting information from people who are in their personal networks. So that's why you have to look at how you are sharing this information with people who are already part of your program or part of your organization. They're incredible assets to this because they're going to share it with their own personal networks. And that's going to just increase the likelihood of people hearing about your program or your project, which from a recruitment perspective for volunteers is very important. But also for your visibility as an organization, these folks can be your best ambassadors because they're going to share it. And we know now that people trust friends and family even more than most media sources. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. And I think we have it here, the next slide. Those are just some tips. I don't think I have to go through them. They've been kind enough to put them all on the slide for you. So those are just, again, some good checkpoints. We also have here at the Corporation for National and Community Service some great MLK Day public service announcements and videos. Now let's go to the slide with the extended video that reads extended video cuts. These are some truly legendary figures in the world of civil rights and whose personal stories and public actions have really personified what MLK, the National Day of Service, is all about. Obviously, Ruby Bridges, Reverend Joseph Lowry, former Senator Harris Wofford, and Congressman John Lewis. If you have not had a chance to check out the PSAs and the videos, please do so. These are, just so you know how we distribute them nationwide. They go out to news stations across the country as an opportunity for them to start. We're actually doing that in the next week or so, sending them out so that the hope is that they start playing these and that we're driving people to one common website. And so I'll go back again and do a commercial for registering for that website. If these PSAs are running, as they're running in your market, you go back to the MLK Day website, and people who are, see these and are reminded that they should be making it a day on and not a day off on MLK Day will likely come to that website. So we want to make sure that your event is there in case they live in your area. So you'll see here a little bit of information on the next one, MLK Day of the PSA, the links of all of these PSAs, which I think is important. And then the next slide over, we have the radio PSAs. So again, just so you know where some of our public service announcements are likely to run, and maybe in some of your media markets, just reinforces the need to get registered early and to provide as much up-to-date and useful information to people who may be visiting the website as a result of the PSAs as possible. So this is just a little bit more about our PSA outreach. It seems like that's just so you know sort of what's on the back end, what we're doing to make sure as many markets as possible run these. So with that, I'm going to end the PSA for the sort of traditional and earned media part and turn things over to Sam to talk about digital media. And then we're going to do Q&A.
Yes, so I will be very brief because I know there are always a lot of questions and we want to make sure that we have time to get to them all. Thank you all again for, I know there are lots of you on the call, so thank you all so much for joining us. Ted spoke to a lot of what I want to highlight here in talking about both digital and social media. You know, I think we've reached the point within communications where we can't even really draw a line between traditional and digital or social anymore. As you start to develop or strategize about your communications plan, it's really important to think about both how both your traditional and your digital plan will work together. And if you're a large organization with many folks, perhaps that's using every single channel and outreach tool in the book. For some of you, if you are 3 people, it might not be every channel. So it'll be using what's right for you, but thinking of them as one comprehensive plan together. And along those lines, telling kind of a cohesive story, right? So if you are telling one story to reporters, if you're using one set of messages and one set of materials in a narrative, and your traditional elements, that's the same set of content that you want to be sharing through your digital channels as well. Because like Ted mentioned before, many reporters, many folks are pulling their or finding their stories online now. It's all interconnected. So you want to make sure that all of those messages and all of those narratives are all sort of the same and telling the same story. We want to encourage you to please link to the official MLK Day accounts and sites. And again, I will put in one more plug. I promise this will likely be the last one, to register your projects on MLKDay.gov so that folks, they appear and folks can find them in the search engine. And Ted also mentioned back on the resources slide, we'll be providing not only templates for press releases and media advisories, we'll be including some sample key messages and talking points, as well as blog posts and social media messages as well. So we would encourage you to use and incorporate that official messaging as well. One note, most of this will be on social media, but one quick note just on websites. Many of you probably have them, and I think Ted made a good point. It's often the first stop that people make when they're looking for information, and I think it's a challenge for all of us to try and keep that information up to date. You know, keep your logos placed prominently, the key information. You don't have to have a whole essay written, but the who, what, where, when, why, the 5 W's, you know, up above the fold, and the most current. If it's changing, just keep the most current information there, because that's likely where most people will be getting their information from. So you'll want to be sure that that's there. And all of your materials, whether they're press or social media, will be linking back there. So we would encourage you to keep your website up to date as well. We'll also have in addition to all of the template resources, we will have a MLK Day web banners and widgets that you can place on your site as well. So those are additional resources for you. Moving on to social media, and I'm happy to talk tactics and specifics, and you have our contact information in this deck, so you should feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions. But again, make social media a component of your communication strategy. As you start to build a press list, pull the reporters' Twitter handles, create a list for them, think about, you know, follow them. Are they talking about these issues? Are they asking questions? Engage with them on that level. If you are, as you're thinking about, and we talked briefly about this earlier, but all of your content needs to have some sort of home online. Whether you have a website, whether you have a blog, it's got to live somewhere, right? Content is always going to be king. So I would encourage you to think about where that might be, right? If you don't have that, you know, blogging is always, we often forget about that because we move on to the new and shiny social media tool. We all want to Pinterest and Instagram and whatever the latest thing is, but blogging, it all comes really back to that. So if you don't have a blog, you could also submit your own post to maybe a community blog. Is a nice way to get your story out there and to have that reference point to link back to. Just some general other broader strategies. This is a great way to engage influential members of your community. Perhaps they are local leaders, perhaps it's elected officials, maybe they're media partners, your notable personalities, your morning news anchors, your local businessmen. Maybe you can't get them to your event, but maybe they're willing to tweet or tell their Facebook page to ask people to go volunteer at MLK Day. So think about, as you're engaging those partners, what your easy, middle, hard asks are, and sometimes it's easy to get people to do that social media for you, and you get the biggest rewards just for that one simple ask. Again, you'll have some sample messages for us, so if you're struggling with that, look for that from us. And in social media, think about, as you start to develop a communications plan, you know, I know it can often be hard as things change each day, but think about in advance, if you can't pre-draft your stuff, what types of content you might want to share. If you have a Facebook page, you know, maybe you're sharing behind-the-scenes looks at planning your project, and you're giving members of that community a look into what it's like to plan your MLK Day project. If you you have a large Twitter following, maybe you're sharing news articles from previous years of what things look like. So think about the types of content you might share. The other word of just general warning, there's a lot of work to be done around MLK Day, so it's often perhaps not the time to start a brand new social media channel. Perhaps you might identify this MLK Day that you want something new, or you want to try something new, and so in the off season you can start to work to that for next year. But we're happy to talk with you about how to reach your goals with whatever channels you do have, because it is overwhelming to start to build a whole new following on a brand new channel, so that can be slightly overwhelming. There's some specific tactics here for both Facebook and Twitter. We do have an MLK Day Facebook and Twitter official page for the corporation. That will begin ramping up its content right about now. We tend to use that sort of November through February. So please mention us and tag us. We love to know what you're doing, and we're happy to retweet and share that and drive whatever traffic you need and help in that manner. It's a great way to sort of ask for things if you need help, if you're looking for donations. Use that as a way to engage your community, and don't be afraid to make direct asks of your followers. If you want people to retweet, if you want people to ask 5 of their friends to come volunteer with them, the more specific your ask is, the more likely you are going to be to have success in that. Again, we can't reiterate enough. Tell your story before, during, after. You know, what is MLK Day? Why is this important leading up to your event? You know, during your event, you're telling the story of the actual service project, and afterwards is just as important. You know, I think for many of you, you're doing service year-round, so it's important to be talking about how these volunteers can be serving year-round in your community, or your organization is giving back to your community year-round. So think about how to utilize either the fans that you're engaging through your social media networks, or if you any of the kind of interviews or traditional media you're doing, to think about that sort of context as well, to pivot this into engaging volunteers with the community year-round. Our official accounts are on here, so you know how to find us. I know there are always a lot of questions, so I think we can open it up. Ted and I are happy to answer them. Whatever you've got, traditional, social, we'll do our best to answer them.
Operator, could you please open the line for questions?
Yes, thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press star, then 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name. Your name is required to introduce the question. Once again, if you have a question or comment, please press star, then 1. There are no questions at this time. Oh, we do have one that just came up. One moment, please. Solomon, your line is open.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that this webinar is just great. It just adds a lot more enthusiasm to our network and the people that we come into with the Uplift Community Network. I had one question. There's history making on January the 21st, as we all know. Obviously, it's MLK Day, plus its inauguration for the president. Just wanted to ask, what are your ideas on maybe including the both together, or would you go your separate ways? Give me your ideas on that, because two special things are happening on that day.
Hey, hi, sir. This is Ted. Yeah, you're right to point out that that's a weekend where the country will be marking the inauguration for President Obama's second term, and also the Day of Service. I know that in 2009 there was a big link between inauguration and service, and so I think that at here we're still working at the details on that front. But I think for those of you on the phone, is that you know, looking at Monday and the weekend, if it's a timing issue, when we think that a lot of national media and local will be focused on the inauguration on that Monday, then perhaps there's nothing wrong with doing an event on a Saturday or Sunday. It's still in the same theme of those things, so that you're not, completely, you're competing for a very small amount of material. But I think that, as far as tying it to the inauguration, that's something for every organization to consider, to see, whether that makes sense for you and your program.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
This is Rhonda. I also think that if you're in the Washington metropolitan area, just because of the logistics of the inauguration, you may also want to consider the days leading up to the holiday.
Okay.
Operator, are there more questions on the line?
Yes. The next question is from Wanda Howard. Your line is open.
Yes. My name is Wanda Howard, and I'm the youth advisor for the Lake Worth NAACP Unit 5768. And my question is, I've been receiving the materials from the headquarters of the corporation, but sometimes they come a little late. And this particular time, I ordered mine back in August, and they were shipped out. But according to the quantity I saw on there, and I have to check my email to see what I actually ordered, but it didn't come as I usually requested it. So is there any way, and I think I sent Stephanie a chat message to ask her, is there any way that someone can tell me what I need to do? Because I used to get the tall stand-ups, and I didn't see them available this time. Will they be available?
The stand-up?
Yeah, well, that's what I call them. But, the displays that you can post around leading up to the event?
Oh, we don't have those. We don't have King Day displays available anymore.
Okay.
Posters are all we have.
Okay. Well, whatever I ordered, I must have inadvertently didn't give the right count in the number, and I received the information. It was on back order. So I'm assuming, I said, well, I saw what they sent me, but I was trying to read what was on back order and how it should have come to me, but it didn't you know, really come the way I thought I had put it in. And I looked at my prior order to last year and how it was able to come. So, in other words,
so if you could email, if you could email us MLKDay@cns.gov, I'll forward it with your information of what you ordered and your name and all that sort of stuff. I'll forward it to our person who manages that contract and see if we can figure it out.
Let me go to my computer because I got it up, and I'm just going to write down what you're telling me. So you want me to go back to the order that I made, find the order that I made?
If you can.
Okay. And do what now?
And forward it to us at MLKDay at MLKDay@cns.gov. CNS.gov. Okay. And you get it? Or? It'll come to me, and I'll forward it to the right person to investigate. If you just tell us what you got and what you didn't.
Okay. Are you Stephanie, who I'm going to be forwarding?
No, I'm Rhonda. I work at the corporation.
Okay. I just see it's lit up like the volume thing is on Stephanie. So, okay, Rhonda.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you so much. And I really think this is helpful. I've had the material since I started my youth council involved in the 90s, and it has grown, but I actually have an organization in my community which was once a part of the NAACP, but they branched out and they have a 501c3. So I've been trying to get them to be involved in this and kind of save some work. Instead of working hard, they can work a little smarter. So hopefully they'll buy into it, maybe not this coming year, the next year.
Good luck. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Operator, do we have more questions?
Yes, the next question is from Sylvia. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and I'm from an organization called Hope Worldwide. I'm actually based in New York, and I'm a volunteer. I was calling, the question I wanted to ask you was you specifically mentioned large organizations as well as small organizations when it comes to communication planning. And I was thinking from the perspective of my organization, at least the region that I'm representing, we are pretty small, and even though we're serving a pretty large congregation, and the community in which we're trying to do our MLK project this year, which is fire-related, I was looking at the perspective of using Facebook and Twitter and blogging. I actually have a blog, and we recently we're starting to create a Facebook page, but we wanted to be able to have, I guess, more content to put on it, because I think there's nothing better than a Facebook page that has nothing on it. So but I just wanted to ask you more about that from the perspective of a small organization where I'm looking at maybe 5 or 6 people being able to really be hands-on, to be able to, to have have a media presence out there. How would you suggest that we go about just being effective? And when I say effective, like, is there a recommendation for how often you post or the content which you post? And is it more about your organization or more about your events or the community that you're in? Thank you.
That's a great question, Sylvia. And I looked at Ted. 5 or 6 people sounds like a lot. I think we've all been in situations where there's been 1 or 2, but sometimes if you're all juggling multiple roles, it can always be a challenge. A few thoughts for you. One, I think if you're trying to get your Facebook page off the ground, you might be in a great position to utilize, because you're an affiliate of a larger structure, to have them help you and maybe push some folks in your direction, because you really want to start building that following. I will say this is feasible for some and not for others, but Facebook advertising is perhaps the most effective way to spend dollars on the internet. So if you have the funds and you can spend very little, like, I mean, we're talking $2,000 to just drive your numbers, and there comes a point where once you get a certain, a certain level of fandom on your Facebook page, it will be easier to accumulate more. So, if that's an option for you, I would encourage you to explore it, because that is, hands down, I think most experts would agree, the most cost-effective way to spend money on online advertising. In terms of frequency, for a new page, I think we'd recommend no more than 4 to 5 times a week. I wouldn't ever post more than once a day unless you're, it's maybe the day before, a couple of days before, you're really asking people to do something specific. It would vary your content. The best way to do that is there are a couple, if you Google this, there are a couple of good pie charts out there that explain this. You should really probably only be sharing about 20 or 30% of your own content and sharing content of others. You want to sort of be creating a community, asking questions of individuals. That can be a significant challenge when you have a new page. And so part of it is, this is still a little bit the wild, wild west. While we have a sense of what works, some of it is just trial and error. So don't be afraid to bend rules and figure out what works for your community specifically. But Facebook is nice now because you can sort of auto-schedule your posts. It will help you figure out what time is best. Use your insights Facebook Insights to determine how people are responding, what has really worked well. I can say that the more graphic your post, the better it's going to be, just because if you think about your own experience and looking at your timeline, there's a lot of stuff coming through that. What you're going to be driven to is the stuff that stands out. So infographics, photos, think about content like that. And the more varied, the better. So hopefully that helps. If you have more specific questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to provide some more guidance.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Ready for the next question?
I think we are.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Ryan. Your line is open.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Cadigan. I'm a VISTA with the California Indian Manpower Consortium in Sacramento. And first, let me just start out and pay a compliment to the folks who have put on these webinars, because I think they're excellent, and I've learned so much, not just about, not just preparing me for MLK Day, but just about the nonprofit world in general. So that being said, my question was similar to Sylvia's, actually, because while I'm serving with a decent-sized organization, I am at the moment the only one working on an MLK Day project, and it's still very much in the development stages. I'm still trying to build partnerships and plan. And I loved this webinar, but I felt like it was kind of talking to someone with a much greater organizational capacity and perhaps more time than I currently have right now. So I don't really have a specific question. I was just hoping I could put that out there and maybe get a little feedback on what you guys think, how to handle this from like a much smaller scale of operations. We're not fully plugged in to the social media world yet. We're still kind of working on that. So that's a bit of a hindrance. But I mean, is there like an abbreviated version of the communications plan that you guys could throw my way? So I'll stop talking now.
No, hey Ryan, this is Ted. Thank you for bringing that, because I imagine there are similar people or other people in a similar situation as you are. So without going into a lot of specifics, how is it you're working for an organization? What are you guys thinking of doing on MLK Day?
Well, right now the plan that I'm working on is basically a creative writing workshop. We're a Native American organization.
Oh, okay.
And it would be a creative writing workshop geared towards people who were part of the civil rights movement, specifically from the Native American side, which kind of took place more in the 70s, I think. Okay. And but it would be generally for Native Americans who are looking to share their stories, potentially vets as well, And then I would probably open it up to just anyone who wants to be part of this. So it's looking at a free creative writing workshop is what I'd like to put on it.
And Ryan, are you guys on, you said social media, you guys are there or are not?
We are working on that right now, but I mean, we don't have a Facebook page. We are starting just within the past week, I think. We've put the policies in place where I can now create a Facebook group. So that is the limit of our social media capacity at this point.
So that's a good, well, I think that you're right. Like, don't look at this and say, oh my gosh, with that limited amount of time, and it seems like you're just getting some parts of the program off the ground, that you're going to be able to do all those things, right? Right. So looking, I can't flip through to the side, but this might be the perfect opportunity for you to do something with Facebook in particular and focus on getting that medium, that channel off the ground. As Sam said earlier, you want to, your thing about Facebook is you're getting people who are genuinely interested in your group and in the topic, and making this an opportunity for you all to sort of engage in that. The people like personal stories. They're going to have to reside. If you're writing stories and you're sharing them through Facebook, you have to have a home for them somewhere else on your website or somewhere else, and you want to make sure that because of your limited time and ability, that when you direct people to someplace, you're giving them in very succinct fashion things to do, whether it's to share this story with their friends or others, and, depending on what success looks like, you're getting them to sign up to get more information about your program, so that in the future, if you start off with, let's just say, 100 people who are following what you're doing on Facebook now, then next year, through the course of the year, you've doubled or tripled or increased in size, and so you want to have measurable ability to sort of track that. So just don't bite off, as you said, don't bite off more than you could chew, but your goals should be the same. One is connecting with people who, remember going back to the recruitment, connecting to people who are closest to your issue in your organization, building that sort of community, doing the storytelling, and it sounds like you're gathering that. And you never know that the next phase, as you do this in the next year or whatever, you may be ready. You may have a collection of stories that would be of interest to some of the folks that we've talked about, some of the local bloggers who take interest in their community, or some of the reporters on television who do local heroes or people with a story to tell. Right?
Yeah, I'd echo what Ted just said. Even if you don't have your own platforms, this is a great opportunity. If there are individuals within your community or who might already be connected to this very specific community and who might be interested, perhaps it's not a full plan, it's just a targeted ask, right? And you have a conversation with them in advance. Maybe they want to share some snippets of these stories after you write them. You can think along those lines. If you don't have your own platforms, are there platforms that touch or would be interested in this work, who might be willing to share it with others for you?
Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
Are there more questions?
Yes, we have a question from Nicole. Your line is open.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. I am currently serving as an AmeriCorps member at Habitat for Humanity of Greater Pittsburgh. My question is, I guess, what is the importance of advertising and media and social media before the event versus on the day of the event? Because we do have 25 service projects happening in Pittsburgh. So how do I balance what we should be advertising more on that day? Should we be focusing on the opening ceremonies, or should we be focusing on trying to get attention to each individual project, or should I be focusing more on the days leading up to those projects?
Hey, Nicole, that's a great question. First of all, thank you for serving in AmeriCorps. That's fantastic, and we all know
Thank you.
Yeah, that with Habitat for Humanity, it's one. So thank you for. And did I hear you correctly? You guys have 25 different projects in the Greater Pittsburgh area.
Yes.
So as far as advertising, let me make sure that we have the similar definition. Are you looking at advertising, recruiting people to volunteer, or are you looking for advertising about just generally the events, or advertising in terms of reaching the press? All the above, or is there one that's more important to you than the other?
I guess all of the above, because we have been using social media right now to kind of advertise the event in general and to find volunteers. We haven't opened up registration yet just because we're still working out a few kinks. But as far as getting people to, familiar with the projects or even just the media in general, should we focus more before the actual event or should we focus more on the event?
So I'll let Sam weigh in, but let me just say what I would consider doing is like in the month up to the event, when you're looking at really putting volunteers and giving them clear direction, you want to do whatever, if you have the ability to do Facebook advertising, some others, you're really going after people who who have in your area geographically, who have liked Habitat for Humanity or have a profile that likes different nonprofit volunteering, something like that. So you're going to go after that group because that's your recruitment effort. So that you're doing to put people into 25 places. Now, on the media side, I imagine, are you all doing some kind of centralized, because you're not going to get, I mean, it'll be highly, that, if 25, depending if they're all in the Pittsburgh media market, it'll be nearly impossible to get media to all of them. Do you want to have sort of centralized location? Is that what you're talking about with your kickoff?
Yeah, we do. We're based where our office is we're kind of using that as a central point for opening and closing ceremonies. So everyone will be gathered at the same time in the mornings and at the end of the day.
So just one thing to consider, you're at an office, since your whole point, I imagine, will be building or rehabilitating homes, right?
No, we kind of stepped away from that for the day and picked up any projects we could find, so we have a lot of different things going on. So,
okay, well, remember we talked about the story earlier. Is there a central theme that unites all of it about Pittsburgh taking action and making it a day on and not a day off? I would pick a couple of things. I would pick, I know if you're working with the different organizations that are doing different things, make sure you have the best and most personal story that goes along with that, someone who has benefited from one of the programs that you're helping or has a personal and interesting story to tell. And then you have representatives from the area, from some of the groups that are involved, and make that your central location for the press. Now, what's good is that if you can go down and do the visuals, and you can do the events, the kickoff events in your offices and an office park or wherever it may be in Pittsburgh, it's good to have a sense of, if the media say, well, we actually like to go to one of the locations where you're doing something and get footage of people volunteering, make sure you have those things in mind, and that if you have the staff and ability that you are sending them all to the same places, because with 25 volunteer places, it'll be hard to track a lot of that. So make sure that you've made it manageable, and that people who are your on-site contacts know that that a TV truck might be rolling up. And you just do that for two reasons. One is that you know that people have a limited amount of time to do the service that they need, and also that people at that site should also, you should also have 2 or 3 maybe at the most. You also should have a personal story there, so that you have someone who is prepped and ready to talk to TV reporters. So again, this is all actions that you can take on the front end that make it a much more organized and seamless process on the day of.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Are there more questions?
Yes, next question is from Brian Norris. Your line is open.
Hello, I'm Brian. I'm the Vista with the College Lake County in Illinois. And this year is going to be, I think, their second year doing the MLK. And they received the grant, so they're going to try and work with several colleges. So I was wondering some of your ideas of how I might tackle the publicity with that, since I know that it was interesting enough just dealing with the schools, because they want things uniform to them. And I forgot the other aspect of the question I had. But, yeah, I know we're doing several sites through the county to try and, make it variant and cover most of the things that people want to do for MLK, like the safety and all that. So what are your ideas of working with different colleges' publicity to try and do like an event like this?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. So okay. your organization received a grant and you're working individually with individual colleges and universities on specific projects?
They're trying to, because they did it last year just on their own, and the grant kind of encourages you to work with other colleges in the area.
Okay.
So we're trying to reach out now to see which colleges we can do it, and I was wondering what would be a good way of trying to correlate this, since there's only like 2 or 3 of us working at it at the college, and we're going to have to end up working with other colleges to try and create a succinct publicity. You know what I mean? Like the same story, no matter which college PR department wants to pick up something.
Right. Well, I think so. I think this is a challenge across the board for it. We see it here at our agency when we work with other agencies. It's just a kind of the nature of the beast, right? So step one might be to try and identify who the correct people are. That seems sort of like a silly step, but sometimes it's not the obvious folks, right? Perhaps the service elements don't go through the traditional comms team, and it goes through somebody else. So I would start there. Figure out kind of in advance who are the right people who need to be involved, and think through the process, right? If we want to put out an advisory and start calling through a media list, what would that look like, right? So let's say you draft it and 3 other colleges need to look at it. Just like draft out that process. And I think do it for us, even here at CNCS, when we do that, it helps not only us think through it, and then we can share that with folks. And before we even like spend the energy doing the work and it just then dies a death because it gets lost in somebody's inbox who wasn't even the right person to review it, we've identified the correct people and the correct process. So I would start there. And then also figure out, what your, who are the key partners for each college and university, and kind of divvy up the workload that way so you're not kind of double dipping and hitting the same folks twice, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I like that listed plan idea.
Sure, good luck.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions?
Yes, the next question is from Sylvia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, okay. Sorry. So the last question I wanted to ask was just, you had mentioned about having a personal story, or in terms of, Ted mentioned having a personal story in terms of having a hook. So I was thinking in my community, the project we're working on is for MLK is fire safety, particularly in the area that we're looking at is an area that has probably the same amount of fires as 2 communities around it that are 3 times its size. So, and obviously, so I'm sorry, not obviously, but in the recent months, some of the things that have happened have been that we've actually had more fires in the summer than we had this year, than we had last year, and even a little more than we had in the beginning part of winter for last year. So it looks like that this may continue to be a big problem for our area. So I was thinking about what you talked about when you said personal stories. And, I guess the first thing I thought about was victims, people who had experienced a fire in fires in my area. But I think a part of me hesitates on that because I'm just wondering whether or not that feels like taking advantage of someone's tragedy we're not actually profiting from it. I'm just thinking taking advantage of someone. I'm just thinking about the ethics of whether or not that's, even if it is to bring light to what's happening and to try and help people understand that this is a big problem and that we're trying to do things to change that. Does that make any sense? I'm sorry.
Sure. Hey, Sylvia. Yeah, that's a good question because you're right. I mean, there are in the area you're focusing on. There might be a way to contact your local fire officials to see if there was a family that for whatever reason was affected but as a result of taking the right steps, did not have the kind of tragic experience that you're talking about. So that's a very different story. That's like saying a family that can reinforce the message about fire safety because it worked for them.
Okay, so instead of finding a family who experienced a tragedy, going the other way and finding a family that through having had some sort of education about fire safety managed to prevent what could have been a terrible situation.
Yeah.
And okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
No, I didn't. I wasn't thinking about the other side of it. I think I only thought about just what happened, and like I said, we actually had since from August until now, we've had 7 fatal fires in my area, and that's over. That's over what, a 3-month period. That's a lot of fires for considering the area that I'm in. But thank you very much.
Oh, sure, definitely. Thank you for the question.
Do we have more questions on the line?
No further questions at this time.
All right. Well, thank you again to everyone who joined us. As you know, I think Rhonda gave out the email address. It's MLK@CNS.gov.
MLK Day.
I'm sorry, MLKDay@CNS.gov. My goodness. So if you have any follow-up questions, please send them our way.
Thanks, Ted. I just want to go over quickly, we have a couple webinars coming up for those of you who'd like to join us for recruiting volunteers on December 5th. And then on January 9th, just before you get into your MLK Day projects, we will have final preparations and opportunities for that inaugural tie-in. And also, for those of you who have not yet completed the poll in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, if you could go ahead and complete the poll, that will help us in creating better webinars for you. And share in the chat feature any other resources or information that we can provide to you to assist with your MLK Day planning. Everyone registered for this webinar will receive a copy of the PowerPoint by email, and it will include links that you're looking for. It will also be posted to MLKDay.gov, and I encourage you to go there and look for other resources mentioned today. And please contact MLK Day at campaignconsultation.com with any questions regarding this webinar. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Ms. Rhonda Taylor.
Everyone, thank you for being such enthusiastic participants in today's webinar. I know that you got great information that will help you be more effective in your outreach strategies. So we wish you all the best. If you have any more questions, please email us. We'll get back to you as soon as possible, and we look forward to seeing all your great media attention. Join us on our social media pages and tweet often. So thanks very much.